Hello again. Okay, thanks so much everybody for taking the time to listen to that talk I gave for you last week and for these wonderful questions. So I'll just record some answers for you here. See if I can further dig into what the hell I'm doing in my art practice. Okay, so the first question I have here is, do you have any criteria for when a social engagement artwork is finished? Do you consider any of your artworks to be ongoing? This is a great question, because I'm sure many of you have had this experience of sort of maybe not having closure on something that you've done. Oftentimes, when you like, if you're making an art project and you have an exhibition that comes at the end of it, or your residency time is over, and then you have these things that you come out of it with, you have these like defined time periods where then an artwork is finished and you experience some kind of closure or some kind of reward by sharing your work publicly. For those of you who have done any social engagement, sometimes the gratification of doing it is again for this like small audience of people that you're doing it for, whether it's a workshop or one-on-one meeting or something. So you have this like little bit of closure at that moment. But then when you think about how it can become a more public story, referring back to that idea I was kept talking about this like this power of imagining a new world. Yes, it's difficult to parse like when something is finished. Oftentimes, I'll think about creating a publication that then like kind of puts a period on the end of a socially engaged artwork. That's a common practice, I think, for a lot of SCC artists. Or a lot of the times, I'll have to define for myself a window of which I'm working on this, or I'm asking the same question and interacting with these same people, and then like at the end of the window, moving on to something else. So it's kind of a put like a tacked on time management window. With some of the projects I showed you, like with Share My Lunch, where I then met my like very good friend and collaborator right after that, there are some moments where there's like a natural progression to the next project because of conversations that you have with another person. Your ideas, of course, will bend, negotiate, and transform based on who you're working with. So there is like a chain reaction when you work collaboratively, mostly with your projects. And to define the edges of those, I think for me, I'm just coming up with new titles, honestly. Like we have Share My Lunch that transformed into, I didn't share with you, but more of like a banquet style Share My Lunch where I brought enough food for lots of people. That was a weird one. I gave everybody a script that I wrote thinking about how to dig into these like awkward moments of like dealing with your silverware and like sharing food with another person, all these like strange social interactions at a dinner party. That piece was called Share My Lunch. No, really, there's enough for everybody. And then from there, there's a snowball effect of different projects, but again, they're like defined by just titles when you look at them in retrospect. Okay, moving on. Next question, what would you do if some of the reactions after people interact with your work is not good? And this is kind of similar to the following question, which is, do you agree that all interactions, even including bad ones, still can be considered as a necessary part of social practice? So I guess there's two questions, so there's kind of two sides to these questions. People interacting, a bad reaction to a piece of work that I've done, I don't consider has happened to me. I think that the worst reaction that people can have had to my work is just a lack of interest or a lack of taking things seriously. In a lot of the projects that I show you, there's this because of my framing through comics and this like use of humor to welcome people in. Sometimes I think that I've gotten feedback about how it feels like sort of a punchline a lot of the time, as opposed to like a deeper dive into like something conceptual or to the building of a relationship, because the building of the relationship is not happening in the public sphere, but happening alongside the art, if that makes sense. So again, I don't think bad is the word for it, but maybe like lack of seriousness. And that happens, that happens to everybody. And then for the second part of the question, do bad ones, as in bad interactions, are they still considered to be a necessary part of social practice. And on reviewing my video that I sent to you all, I think I talked a lot about this positive follow up. I know, positive like ideation about what can happen in a socially engaged project and the story of it. But actually the bad interactions, as in like socially awkward experiences, disagreements, if we say those are bad, weirdness, all of those experiences are actually like the stuff of inspiration for me. Again, I don't consider them, that is like an interesting word, because as you know, in like a social milieu of like a one-on-one interaction, there's all kinds of weird stuff that happens, whether it's like awkward silences, or you disagreeing with a stranger, misinterpretation, miscommunication, language barriers, all these strange things that can happen between people. That stuff is the stuff that I'm most interested in, actually, when we're talking about socially engaged art on like a one-to-one engagement with another person. I will give you a quick example, because I talked about this project just very briefly at the end of the talk. Let's make it big. Where I talked about making the zine handbook to defy, edify, institutional racism in the art school. And this, as you can imagine, this zine wasn't inspired by only positive interactions between people like me experiencing institutional racism at the time that I wrote it. It wasn't all camaraderie, wasn't all based on the solidarity, even though that's what it focused on, because that's more fun to focus on. It did come from, all these really odd, as we can see in Macadamia Nut, all these really odd microaggressions, macroaggressions, or conglomerate microaggressions, as in they happen like so much that they seem big, that happen like on a day-to-day basis, and they're just strange, like these various tiny interactions. Like, let's see if one of the examples, Macadamia Nut hosts a cookie party in Lip Sync Alley Schoolyard, issue 7, where Nut plays along with the hot air. So Macadamia Nut's making fun of sort of the lip service that often is heard in like progressive circles, where everyone claims to be progressive, and in that way sort of doesn't deal with their internal biases, but just by believing that you're sort of progressive doesn't mean that you don't have internal biases. We all do. So you can see where those biases come out in like these really small ways that people speak, or that people react to, even talking about issues of racism. And so from that, a lot of like this whole character was inspired. And I wouldn't say, I think that internal racism, like biases towards racial discrimination, yeah, you can qualify that as bad. So I think that's how I'll answer that question. Okay, go back. I'll stop sharing until I come up with another connection there. Okay, next question. What process do you go through when making a project? How do you go from emergence to a solidly made installation or project? This question, I think, I don't know if I can answer that question. It's sort of different per project and different per group of people that you're working on. I think leaving space for emergence is especially important when you're working with other people. And you can see in, I think, the majority of the projects I showed, I'm not working by myself. So it's constant negotiation. The idea, even in naming things, I talked about how important titling is right at the beginning of this video. And even that, as a collaborative effort, is some of the most fun and interesting conversations I've had about conceptualizing a piece of work. So I think that's all. I guess that's all I'll say about that question. I think it's different per project, and oftentimes it goes from sort of collaborative writing. Say I'm working with that pool project that I introduced with artist Narali and designer Jean Chisholm, and then Bopa Chai, who was the director curator of Art Speak at the time. we did a lot of collaborative writing on documents to ask questions to each other, and more, hypothetically, about what we're curious about in the time of the pandemic, when we're still trying to be, socially active and, I don't know, politically active in certain ways during a time when we couldn't be physically together. So we're rethinking ways to continue to gather even in that strange time and talk about difficult things. So we did a lot of collaborative writing, and then from that we get these edited documents of like a glossary of terms that we then turned into a publication, or a list of questions that we then used to fuel the conversation for the different gatherings that we hosted on Zoom and social distanced in our little pool pods. So yes, a lot of writing, and if I'm feeling particularly energetic about a project, I have a pretty rigorous journaling and comic making practice that goes alongside all that. Okay, how do you get inspiration to plan, regulate, and practice your thoughts? There you go, writing. Writing and collaborative writing. I don't know if any of you have done a project where you're really doing collaborative writing, but it is one of the strangest ways to collaborate with another person, as you know, that writing is like a very internal sort of solo practice that you need to focus in order to be able to do. So when you have this like shared document going back and forth of people sort of editing and mending and inserting their ideas into other people's ideas, first you need like a strong amount of trust so that you don't get annoyed with whoever you're working with, and vice versa. But at the same time, this other person, if you find the right person to collaborate with, can actually both complicate and clarify your ideas, because you are writing directly sort of for and to another person, and they're bouncing back ideas at you. So writing and speaking, I suppose, with another person. Okay. I hope that's a good answer to that question. Okay, how would you balance a situation if you met someone who had a diametrically opposed view to your own, but who could convince you very well? If you wanted to continue with the same topic with the next person, would you use a new point of view, or would you keep your original idea? In the context of Shyamalan, really, I brought too much. Okay, so I think I understand this question. I think it kind of relates to what I was talking about before, with this like sort of chain reaction of projects based on ideas, based on conversations. But in this sense, I think it's less about artistic collaboration and more about like the more one-off interactions that my art practice sort of designs with other people. This question is interesting. I think I'm going to go off on a tangent a little bit. This question is interesting to me because it actually relates more to concepts that I deal with when I'm writing comics and developing characters, which I didn't talk about very much in the talk, but that I gave. But I'm very curious about sort of creative fiction writing and following characters around the worlds that they live in. You can see how, I guess, my interest in other people, like in strangers, sort of applies to this practice of making up a stranger, a character based on a name or based on something, and then following it around to see what relationships they have and how they react to different circumstances. But anyway, sorry, this is a whole tangent. But in comic making, if you make comics, it's very dialogue based. So you have characters talking to each other, or characters witnessing something like on the street, or characters sort of walking around their world and having their experiences. And then how stories develop is oftentimes those conversations or the same phrases that someone else said will come up in a different character's conversation with another character. So you can sort of see the trajectory of a thought based on what a comic book character is saying and repeating and thinking, similar to their experiences, that they'll have an experience and then combine it with something that they were thinking about while they're talking to another character. I wish I had an example for you, but I don't have one uploaded right now. But I'm very interested in this, like, I don't know, I guess emergence is the word we're using. So the emergence of sort of learning something new, especially in disagreement with another person, because disagreements arguably take more trust. They take more critical thinking, and they take more, I guess, balancing, negotiating your own thoughts. So I think they're more interesting than agreements. But I'm very interested in that, I don't know, that snowball effect of how thoughts develop, especially in conversation with different people. I don't think that answers the question, but I like this question because it makes me think of how that works. I'm just rereading it to see if there's anything else that I can say about that. I guess I will say that the it's hard to say whether or not in the types of projects that I do, if my ideas stay my own or they are developed or changed because of an interaction I've had with another person. Uh, it's a very fluid practice. I don't think it's maybe possible for, even if say my title stays the same, my background concept stays the same. I would argue that it's not really possible for anyone's ideas to stay their own. I don't know. Okay, let's move on. Okay, seeing all of your projects, it seems like you had so much fun engaging with strangers as well as executing the different activities. Which project do you think was able to convey the strongest message, and is there anything you would do differently if you were to do the project again? Okay, so for this question, I think that the project that conveyed the strongest message, I think, was probably the project I talked about very briefly right at the end of the talk I gave, called the Center for Polite Dissent, because it was both a conceptual, publishing house space and a physical space. It's interesting because in reality, in that project, there was a lot of concept writing that turned into sort of pamphlets and zines, but there was a lot of conversations that happened between a group of five to 10 people that were involved in the project. And so it meant a lot for the people involved in the creation of the center. What's weird about that project is this, I think that the story of it is fairly strong because of all this concept writing that we did, all these conversations that we had about it. But when we would host events, pop-up events. Sometimes they were at people's houses and sometimes they were in the Emily Carr Library and the downtown library as well. The amount of people who would come to those events was quite small. Like the amount of engagement we were getting with people who were just coming into the project or just heard of the project was quite minimal. So while it had that project, similar to a lot of Citizen Engaged projects, I think, had a strong impact on those involved in its creation. And I think that the story that I keep telling about it is still a strong concept and an interesting idea. I don't know. It's interesting how it's that meaning is diffracted from how it was actually, how many people were actually like coming in as strangers to the events at the time of its creation, whether that was because the spaces we were hosting were awkward or because they were in, for example, people's homes. They were esoteric in a way. I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't know. There is this weird division between who is affected the most by the meanings of different projects, since there's so many different levels of public engagement. Okay, how do you manage the necessary bureaucracy involved in social practice? Do you circumvent or delegate or something else entirely? I love this question because I've been trying to figure out this for a long time now. And actually with the project I shared called My Beautiful Laundry, I think is one of the, I won't say first, but one of the, I don't know, few projects where I have been given, freedom to design the space however I see fit. At the same time, the need for the laundromat for that project is dictated because the town itself doesn't have one. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but the town is in dire need of a laundromat. It's a community where half of the population lives off the grid, and there's this culture of like borrowing friends or friends of friends laundry machines in people's houses. So I don't know. It's a common joke in the town that if you want to be successful there, just open a laundromat. And so that the premise is dictated by the community that the project is for. So there's some boundaries there. Like I want it to be a functional place where you can do your laundry, but at the same time, I don't have to deal with any other bureaucracy of, say, starting an actual laundromat or running a business or making a profit or like dealing with any kind of certification or safety laws. I don't know if that's a thing for laundromats. So I don't know. This question is multi-pronged because I think that sums up the reason why being an artist is more fun than being a member of a different discipline, because you can sort of dip your hands into being a business owner. You can dip your hands into being a party planner or a chef or an oceanographer. Like you can dip your hands into all these different disciplines and not have to follow the rules because you're I mean, at the end of the day, you're outside of those systems. And I won't get into some of the more negative experiences I've had with, working within a organization or institution when you're trying to do what you want to do. Because my practice now has been avoiding that. Like knowing the clues or being able to see when an opportunity will allow you to do what you want to do and not have to sort of bend all of your ideas to fit not the community, but sort of an institutional or organization's needs, if that makes sense. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead. I think I've answered some of the other questions with we have a lot of questions about like what happens when you have a negative experience, and I think those are very important as well. I will say that one of the most annoying circumstances you would have to deal with if you're sort of opening a space up for anybody to come talk to you is you really have to figure out social clues for letting people know that you are finished. Finished with the conversation or finished with this segment of the project. I've been saved by putting window blocks on different conversations, because some people, I love it, but some people just love to have somebody to talk at. So, you have to make up window parameters of time where you're going to be in the space, or practice your passive or overt social clues for saying like, okay, I have to just stop talking to you now. Okay. Meeting. Okay. I think I kind of answered this next question about the creative process. I feel like I did answer that question. So I'll see if there's anything else specific. This question asks I would like to know more about your creative process in organizing projects like My Beautiful Laundry and the Fridge Artist Center. Where do you generally gain your inspiration and ideas from? And how do you find the process is like while you're bringing them to life? Do they often fully go in directions you envisioned, or do you often have to adapt, and how so? So I think in combination with this openness to collaboration with these two projects specifically, they're different. Okay, so for the Bridge Artist Center, it was developed one out of this like undying need I have to be useful or relevant to my immediate community. And then instead of fighting that, I just kind of dive right in to trying to be useful. So with the fridge, I don't know, I was connecting dots about, I was very interested in food waste at the time. And I was starting to develop a way to make that papyrus paper that I mentioned out of food waste, because I worked in food service for almost a decade before returning to the art world. So I don't know, I was thinking about feeding people food waste and trying to connect dots between that and sort of being useful to my community of hungry working artists. So I was just connecting dots there. And then with one premise like that, or with one premise of this town needs a laundromat, how do we make a laundromat? If you keep it pretty simple, like keep it on based on a singular need that a community has spoken about, the rest of it can be totally open. You know, I think a lot about how to welcome people in, as I've mentioned with food a lot, with jokes, with small publications that you can carry it in your pocket. There's all these ways that I rely on to get people to actually come to these spaces. And it's often a mix between something being useful and something being like, I guess, like a party, with there being exciting, or being, lately I've been using a lot of color to represent that, like neon and risograph colors. But they never go in the directions I envision. So I guess it's a whole practice of adapting. With the Fridge Artist Run Center, I was thinking I would be useful to my community, because I would be, you know, providing free food for them, through this kind of funny gallery where you could also display food-based work. But I hosted these workshops, and people would come and talk to me about how mostly they liked having a break where they could like not take making so seriously, or they could play with their food. Nobody was eating the food, because when, again, I don't know, people have a difficult time differentiating between what you can touch with your hands and what goes into your mouth. Like these two things don't, yeah, you can't play with your food, I guess, as an adult. So yeah, the Fridge turned into more of a gallery than a food distribution center, which I thought the opposite would be the case, because I figured everybody wants to eat. We'll see what happens with My Beautiful Laundry. At this point, I'm thinking of it as a research project, because the exhibition is happening next summer, where I have the functional pieces in tow, these like portable laundry machines. But to prepare for it, I've been just thinking a lot about laundry, writing about public and private practice of cleaning your clothes and presenting yourself in your clothes. And I've been taking a lot of pictures of clothes hanging and talking to people about how I love laundry, and then they send me pictures of like clotheslines. And so I've been doing some collage work there to try to find, similar to that collaborative writing practice I mentioned. It's just like having a premise and then trying to dig into aesthetic and conceptual pieces of that premise in order to I don't know, design the space so that people will take interest in the concepts at hand. Okay, and the final question is about social anxiety. I love this question. So if I were to imagine myself setting up these activities that rely on interactions, and then experiencing these unknown interactions, I get a sense of social anxiety. Did you struggle with this feeling? I should say, do you struggle with this feeling, or do you perhaps have other challenging emotion thoughts about socially engaged activities, and how do you overcome it? So with things like Share My Lunch, or the interaction where I made the paper for this, or My Soup, did I call it My Soup, Your Soap, that project that I made for that one couple that I met. For things like that, I'm actually, I don't know how I come across, but I'm actually not as, I don't know, extroverted as the practice would require, seemingly. I don't know if you've noticed this about people who perform, but I've met a lot of performers who on stage are fantastic. They seem like they could be, they're so likable, they're so gregarious. But then in when you talk to them one to one, they don't make eye contact, you know, like they have weird, they're, it's not the same. There's a personality shift that occurs when someone's on stage a lot of the time, and then when someone is in real life. So I think I utilize that quite a bit just in my own brain. I think when I go to meet a stranger with this art project in mind, of course I'm trying to be, I have something, that I want. First of all, I want to ask them questions. I want to like be inspired by something in our conversation. So that kind of, that focus on something that I would like to get out of the conversation helps with awkward pauses and not knowing what to do. There's like some kind of structure, at least based on the outcome. But also, you think like if for Share My Lunch, I was rolling around sort of a stage and setting up stage props in order to host these conversations. And the stage props both worked as symbols to other people that I was, you know, open for a conversation. But they also are sort of, I don't know, arguably shields, you know, like they are, when you are performing, you don't, I don't know, like I'm saying, you just have there's a bit of a personality shift. Maybe that stage creates a social barrier that you feel safe behind or something like that. Because you're, yeah, I don't know why. And for projects that had more difficult terms, like the Center for Polite Dissent or the publications that came out of it, I should also say that project, at the same time I was doing a lot of I guess you could say administrative political stuff. I don't know. I was on a lot of committees, and Minora, my collaborator, and I also designed a workshop for teachers called the Anti-Racist Classroom, where we like talk to teachers about how to create community agreements so that when your internal biases come out in the things that you say, whether you're the teacher or it's between students or it's about something else that happened or it happens in critique all the time, that you'd have these like these things that you could do in retrospect to further talk about it, talk about the situation, and not just let it go under the rug. With projects like that, dealing with something that's like close to home in every facet of your practice, both as a person in an institution, as an artist, and as a friend, like it's all encompassing. I'm sure many of you have had a similar experience. It's stressful. You really have to continually work on your own internal biases so that you don't come off as hypocritical, kind of thing. And actually, the zine that I showed you, the handbook, came from this practice of finding solace with your collaborators. This is a really important concept to me, and I don't know why I haven't brought it up before, but when you're dealing with something that's very, very difficult, and it's not something maybe that you particularly want to be fully invested in, but you see the need for it, that solace in finding the 2 or 3 people that you want to collaborate with on this project, on this thing that you're doing, is like so important. It's really the only thing, for me at least, that can allow a continued effort in dealing with things like macroaggression and racial bias and stuff like that. And of course, you're a different person when you're with your friends than when you are in a public sphere. So a lot of the times, those conversations where you're you know, back talking to the institutions that you're a part of, they're funny. You figure out ways to cope with all the stress that you have, and you further create bonds and come up with new concepts about what you're doing. So weirdly, I guess that's a weird thing. Social anxiety can be solved by more social interaction sometimes. Okay, so that's where I'll end the question time. Thanks again for these thoughtful questions, and I hope you had some of your curiosities answered. Thanks again, everybody, for inviting my half of my body into your class. I've enjoyed talking at you. Okay, bye-bye.